Far Cry 5 is a good game, a very good game actually. It manages to fix many of the series' biggest problems while improving on their traditional strengths. The side content is now as fun and engaging as anything in the main storyline, and it supports what the storyline is trying to convey rather than actively fighting against it. Outposts are now more varied and distinctive with actual reasons for existing. The guns for hire are a mixed bag, but I never felt like they were actively getting in my way. Lydia. Even the fishing minigame has some thought and care put into it. As a purely gameplay experience, Far Cry 5 is without a doubt the best in the series. It's just got a very blah story told in a truly awful way. Far Cry as a series has long been steeped in the 80s action flick aesthetic. Seriously, the box art for the original game wouldn't have looked out of place hanging outside a movie theater in 1987. Recent iterations of the franchise have focused on deconstructing the aesthetic though, spending as much time pointing out how ridiculous the idea of it is as wallowing in it. This has never really landed though, because Ubisoft Montreal has consistently failed to understand a very important point. Video games aren't movies. Historically, storytelling mediums have always been passive. Songs, stories, books, theater, movies are all passive media. Someone is telling a story and the audience sits there and absorbs it, but takes no part in telling the story. The problem with storytelling in games is that the audience is no longer passive. You have to take into account how you'll deal with player actions with relation to how the story is told, and decide how big a role you'll let the player have. This is a massive shift in how stories are told, and people are still working out how to do that in a medium where the audience now has a say in things. In some cases, games are fairly linear, and they minimize the chances for characters to interact in any meaningful way with the story, letting you handle the gameplay, but then taking the reins for the story. The Mass Effect series is a good example of this. While the player has control over many of the fine details and the overall tone of how Shepard acts in the story, the basic overall plot is very much fixed. This works because the player understands their role in the game, and the gameplay backs it up. While there are some elements of choice, the game never really pretends that the player is in total control. Regardless of whether you choose Paragon or Renegade, you're still fighting the Reapers. The real problem comes when you create an open world game. In an open world game, the player is in control of just about everything. What missions you do or don't do, what order you do them in, where you go, who you see, and on and on and on. The player has as close to total agency as you're going to get. Just because in my playthrough I focused on meeting a certain group of characters in a certain order, it's entirely possible that somebody else could play through an open world game and never meet those characters at all. How do you incorporate that into a story? Now, the agency that the players have is limited by programming constraints. Every possible decision can't be accounted for, but due to the nature of the game, it is expected that reasonable reactions will be accommodated. The problem with Far Cry 5 is that it doesn't take player agency into account like an open world game should, or even like a linear game should. It delivers its story like I don't use this pejoratively, but like a walking simulator would. It decides when you're going to interact with the story, it tells you how you'll interact with the story, and if you disagree, well, go pound sand. In a genre all about player agency, this game positively loathes it when it comes to the story, and this is what I mean by Ubisoft Montreal not getting that games aren't movies. They have made a game in the most player-active genre, but want the player to immediately sit back and passively accept the story with zero input. So let's focus in on Far Cry 5. When I played through the game, I started in the valley, like Dutch suggested. It made sense to me, stop the flow of new recruits. So I started playing around in the valley, doing side missions, doing story missions, just farting around and really enjoying things. Then I liberated an outpost and filled up the first bar on the resistance meter. Story time! I get a notice that I'm now being hunted. Okay, I thought I was before, but whatever. So I am immediately swarmed with tougher enemies. Doesn't matter where I am or what I'm doing, armed trucks full of enemy heavies and regulars come barreling in. On the radio, they're saying to use bliss bullets. Bliss being the cult's mind-altering drug. Once this happens, if you take even a single hit from an enemy anywhere, you are knocked out and carted off to the cutscene. Now, the first time this happened, I didn't realize what was going on and was knocked out pretty much immediately. The second time, I thought it would be clever when they came for me at the airport. I jumped in an airplane, took off, flying away to do some flying missions, thinking that I beat the system, only to get pinged with a bullet from ground fire nearly 2 kilometers from where the hunting party was and get knocked out while I was flying an airplane. Yeah, I don't know how I survived that. I learned that participation in the story missions was not going to be voluntary. It didn't matter what you were doing or wanted to do. If you felt like dealing with John's crap or not, you were going to do the story missions when you were told. This theme carries on through all 3 zones of the game. In Faith's area, you'll just spontaneously fall into a random bliss coma and go through her story missions. In Jacob's zone, it's the same, just random brainwashing. This is not a good way to go about getting the player to interact with a story. It cancels your agency and forces you to interact with it rather than enticing you in or just letting the player plain old decide that they want to move the story along. Rather than looking forward to filling up the resistance meter, I actively grew to loathe it anytime I got close to a full bar. If that was the worst of Far Cry 5's sins, then I would probably just roll my eyes and deal with it. The problem is that the story they are ham-fistedly forcing on you is fundamentally flawed in how it's delivered. First off, the characters. Far Cry as of late could rightly be said to revolve around its villains. Both Vaz and Pagan Men are 2 of the most entertaining characters in modern gaming, and rightly deserve their place on the box art of both games. The major problem with 5 is that the Seed clan just isn't engaging, villainous, awful, and definitely people I wanted to put a bullet in by game's end, but just not engaging. Whereas I'd happily sit there and listen to whatever Vaz or Pagan wanted to prattle on about, the only thing I wanted the Seeds to do is just shut up. The thing about Vaz and Pagan Men is that they're in on the joke. They understand that they're the bad guys. They know they're the villains, and sure, they have reasons for what they do, but at the end of the day, they know what they do to accomplish those ends is awful. But because they know what they're doing and why they're doing it, as a player, I never feel like I have to argue with them. I have to try to convince them that they're the bad guys, because they know it right from the outset. And this contrasts starkly with the Seed clan, because the Seed clan never once wavers in their beliefs. Even during their death scenes, they're still wholly committed to their shtick. Now, I understand this, of course. They're a cult. This is what they believe. But the fact they never show a moment of clarity of how terrible they are. The fact that, as a character, I can never point it out how bad they are, just makes every single time that you have to interact with them infuriating. And what's worse, the game never lets you, not even once, try to resist or disagree or not go right along with their crap. Like I said before, if just railroading you into the story missions was the worst thing Far Cry 5 did, then okay, whatever, we'll move on. It's not that big of a deal. But the problem is that they railroad you into these story missions, and then they railroad you in these story missions. Faith provides probably the best examples of this. And the very first time that Faith pulls you into the bliss, and we're not even going to get into how the heck that magic works, but whatever. The first time she pulls you into this bliss dream, you are standing atop one of this giant statue of the Father, and in order to progress the story, you have to jump. She's basically telling you to trust in the Father and just take a leap of faith, a literal leap of faith. The problem is that the game does not let you refuse. The game simply will not let you say no. You have no choice. You have to go and you have to jump off this. You have to take her crap at face value and go for a dive. And that is infuriating because, once again, you have no agency as a player. You've entered the story mission and you're going to progress through the story, and that's that. And both Faith and Jacob's sections have their own problem. Specifically, in Faith's, you spend most of your time interacting with her in the bliss stream in a drugged out state. And in Jacob's, you're supposed to be brainwashed. Well, here's the problem. And this is always a problem when you try to do either dream or drug sequences in a video game. The player is stone cold sober. So when you're trying to convey this dream state, or you're trying to convey this sense of unreality, it doesn't work. The thing that makes dreams effective is the fact that you don't know you're in a dream at the time. It's the same thing that makes the bizarreness of the drugs work. Well, when you're in a video game, the player is stone cold sober. And as a consequence, you have to be very careful with the way you use dream or drug sequences to try to convey part of the story, because I never bought it. I was really ticked off the entire time I was in Faith's bliss streams, because I'm not whacked out of my gourd. I know she's a liar. I know she's a manipulator. I know I'm drugged and none of this is real, but I'm not given a chance to resist. And it gets worse. Because not only are you now not allowed to resist, when you get into the second dream, you're forced to confront the deputy, one of the people that you were with in the beginning. And here's the thing. As he sits here and he explains why he loves it in the Bliss, why he loves the Seed Clan and what they're doing, as he's explaining all this to you, you have no choice but to sit in this stupid little boat and listen to him prattle on with his freshman-level psychology, and the entire time you know for a fact that he has been drugged and brainwashed. But the game doesn't have the decency to give you an out. The game doesn't let you interrupt him. The game doesn't let you stop him. The game literally makes you sit there in a very boring, uninteresting environment, and all you can do is listen to a guy who's totally brainwashed try to convince you that you really want to be brainwashed too. It absolutely does not work. And as I said before, the big issue with both of these instances is there is zero player agency. You're in an open world game, you have an immense amount of freedom, until you get into these cutscenes, and then you are completely locked out. Not even a chance to choose to resist, not even a chance to say no. You just got to take it and move on. But once again, it gets worse, because now we move on to Jacob's area. In Faith's area, you kind of have to always go into the Bliss at some point. The way the territory is laid out, you pretty much cannot accomplish missions in her area without going into the Bliss at some point. So it makes a little bit of sense that you are getting into the Bliss, you're getting more and more of it into your system, and then boom, Faith can contact you through magic. The problem is that when you get into Jacob's area, you're just brainwashed. You get to the first cutscene, they drag you in because apparently they have no difficulty capturing you for cutscenes, but the rest of the time they're just totally incompetent. But they pull you in for that first cutscene, and guess what? You're brainwashed. There's no discussion of how it happens, there's no discussion of why. No. You're just brainwashed. Ta-da! And it's not even terribly done. I mean, the way that they do the player's conditioning is actually surprisingly well done in the way that it encourages you to move through it. But the problem with the whole scene is you're just brainwashed because we say you are. Nope, you are just brainwashed. And it's sad because in the way they handled everything after that point, it's pretty clear to me that between the level designers and the writers, they probably could have come up with a pretty good sequence of providing a way that it feels like you had some say in it, but you didn't, that they funneled you to where they wanted you to go. Because that's what the whole brainwashing sequence does. The problem is you never show how you get there. Because once again, player agency is not a thing that happens when it's time for the cutscenes. However, you can't really discuss Far Cry 5's story without going all the way to the end, without that final confrontation between you and Joseph Seed. And I don't think I've had this much of a problem since Mass Effect 3 with an ending. Because, like I said, most of the cutscenes have not represented your player agency whatsoever. They've just ignored it, but then you reach the ending. You fly to Joseph's compound or you drive. I flew, because by that stage of the game I just flew everywhere in a helicopter because it was just quicker and easier. But I flew into his compound, landed. Sure enough, all my guns for hire just disappear. I go up to confront him, and he gives you an option. You can turn around and leave, which goes to what I would probably consider a bad-er ending, or you can confront him. You get a fairly creative boss battle. But here's the problem. If you decide to confront him, you turn around and every single one of your guns for hire, every single one of the people that you've been playing with, every single one of the people that you've been working together with are under the cult's control. Yeah, somehow, these guys that you were just wiping the cult out with 5 minutes ago, that you were just, taking out all the other seeds and wiping everything out and destroying their plans. Yep, those people, all those guys, they're secretly part of the cult now, because we could not come up with a better way to have this final confrontation happen. Yeah. All that work, all that time spent playing and making decisions and enjoying yourself, yeah, it was all part of Joseph's plan or something. It was. I don't know. It's ridiculous. It is absolutely ridiculous. And it's because they needed something to be a final boss battle, I suppose. And now the game is over, you think. Okay, fine, we're good. Except you're not. Because in what is probably one of the first times I've seen an actual rocks fall, everyone dies ending put into a game, all of a sudden nuclear weapons go off. Yeah, nukes. So done some research, and this actually doesn't come completely out of the blue, but here's the problem. The only clue that you have that this is even a possibility comes from radio broadcasts. You know, those broadcasts that sometimes occasionally cut in on the radio as you're driving. There is 1 or 2 actual radio messages that indicate that there has been conflict in the Middle East, Russia has been nuked, and that basically everybody's sort of kind of expecting that nuclear war may be on the offing. Here's the problem. That's the only place that this is given a hint that it might be coming. And personally, I have to question the intelligence of the people that decided to put a massive plot point hidden on the radio. You know, the thing that you might not be listening to. The thing that you might have turned off so that you could listen to your companions talk. The thing that you might leave on the Seed Clan's broadcasts. Or the thing that you may never even listen to because you fly around the helicopters or you use the fast travel system. Why in the world would you have this singular bit of information that this is a possibility so hidden and tucked away that you may never hear it? I mean, I probably spent well over an hour or more listening to that radio in the game, and I never heard this broadcast until I went back and looked it up online. It actually does exist, but why? And now nukes are falling to end the game. The problem here, of course, is that it's meant to make you question, was Joseph right? Well, no, he gouged people's eyes out with his thumbs, had his followers crucifying people, and brainwashed and drugged people by the hundreds. No, he's not right. This is not a case where you go, oh wow, the bad guy was right all along. No, the bad guy was a murderous savage. Maybe he guessed right, but he's still a monster that needed to be put down. But now Montana is being nuked. Yes. That whole area that you worked so hard to liberate is now engulfed in nuclear hellfire. Thank you for playing our open world game. Everything you think you accomplished or enjoyed doing is now radioactive waste. And to finish the game out, somehow Joseph gets out of his handcuffs, drags you to Dutch's bunker, kills Dutch, and now you're chained up to his bed, listening to the father prattle on about his stupid philosophy. Game over. You lose. I do not even remotely understand what they were going for with this. Is it supposed to be edgy? I mean, this kind of does fall in line with Ubisoft Montreal's recent insistence on trying to take the piss of the action genre. In Far Cry 3, they tried to make light of the idea that you have this person comes in, saves all these people, and somehow becomes Rambo. They wanted to point out how insane it is that this is even a thing that can happen. In Far Cry 4, they once again try to mess with the idea of this person who suddenly comes into this conflict and is going to settle it for these little guys. It turns out the little guys were pretty much monsters themselves. And now in Far Cry 5, you swing in to liberate this county from this horrible cult. Only problem is, the cult was wrong. But once again, it just does not land, because there was no way to really see this coming, to prepare for it, or do anything about it. I mean, were we supposed to join the cult? I mean, should that be what the message of this is? But you're never given the option. Or is it just in the end that you don't get to be a hero? Nobody gets to be heroes. You just get to be another victim. Even though you beat this guy, even though you had him in handcuffs, even though you had multiple opportunities to kill him, even though you wiped out his cult, you wiped out his family, you saved all these people, no, because of something you had absolutely no control over, you don't get to be the hero. In the end, I love Far Cry 5. I think it's a fantastic game. I just hate Far Cry 5, the movie.